Good afternoon and welcome to this session that is focused around an ESPON project called Digital Innovation in Governance and Public Service Provision. I'm happy to welcome back you from the lunch. I hope you had a wonderful opportunity to network with colleagues that you have perhaps not seen for over a few years and also share a good meal with them. Today, my name is Martin Gauck. I work at the ESPON program. I'm coordinating and conducting the research activities from the ESPON side, and also this project was under my governance. This project is currently being finalized, and I'm happy to invite the research team behind this project to give you some insights today about the findings. We will organize our session as follows. I will give a brief, or rather, let's say, not very brief, but an introduction to the topic, about the context, and also explain a few grand challenges that we were working to frame the project. And then I will be followed by Grazia Consillo and Michelangelo Secchi from the university, or from the Politecnico di Milano, and then Isaac Servanja from Connected Places Catapult. Also, I would like to invite you to be active participants of this session. Those of you who missed maybe the morning session, we also have Slido that we are using. So you can open your mobile phones and go to slide.do and type in ESPON, and you can then pick the right session, which is called the Digital Innovation, and post questions through Slido. But also I would welcome you to raise your hand and ask a question in person. There are microphones circulated around, so just wait until the microphone reaches you. And I would also invite you to briefly introduce yourselves before you pose the question. So going into the topic. Europe is aging, and we heard about this in the morning session as well, and all of you also know that fact, but it's aging quite rapidly. It's expected that in the next 30 years, there will be, let's say, there will be around 2 working age persons per 1 retirement age person. Currently, it's around 3.2. Also, this means that the demand for public services is rising, especially in the most costly areas of healthcare and also pensions, social systems. So this puts a lot of increased pressure on governments. But we also know that there are many other underlying socioeconomic processes that we can observe spatially that are making this issue very complex. This is a map that portrays the population growth and decline in Europe. So the brown areas are the ones that are losing population, and the blue areas are the ones that are gaining population. Some of them very rapidly. Many of them have lost over the half of the population that they had over the last 10, 20 years. We also know that European government system is very fragmented, and this is a map that I put together just in 10 minutes, so don't take it as a very scientific observation, but it's more a provocation perhaps. But it rings true because we do have around 95,000 municipal or local administrative units in the ESPON countries, meaning the European Union, UK, and the EFTA countries. And over half of them have less than 1,000 inhabitants in them. I used some thresholds to build this map from some of the recent municipal reforms that have occurred in Europe, namely the Danes and also the Estonians and the Latvians. And when they were going about their administrative reforms, the central government was proposing different threshold levels, how big the optimal government should be to be able to still deliver good quality services, whether it's digital or not. And I believe that the Estonians started with a number around slightly above 20,000. The Danes went with 30,000, but of course then it was the negotiation between the local and the central governments, and this was coming down. So the Danes opted with 20,000 inhabitant municipalities. Of course, exceptions needed to be made because of some specific natures of certain municipalities that are insular, for example. And I believe the Estonians conceded with a number between 6,000 inhabitants minimum or 10,000 inhabitants minimum. So you see that these countries have analyzed the situation, and concluded that small governments have difficulties in delivering services. And it rings true, especially in the digital age, where you don't need to take your horse and your carriage to drive to the nearest center to pay your taxes or to go to visit or to get educated. You can do these things now more and more increasingly in a digital form. Also, it's becoming increasingly difficult to maintain this complexity, because we see often digital as an improvement and as an efficiency in governance, and it's certainly true, but it also drives up certain costs for public administrations. And especially now when we are in the middle of crisis, a different crisis, pandemic-induced, but also induced by the global conflicts, we see that the EU had to suspend temporarily their financial rules. So meaning that countries can go above the allowed level of public debt. They can also go above the allowed level of public deficit, annual deficit. And these rules are suspended for another year. So 2023 will be also the year where these rules are no longer applied. So meaning that, penalties were not applied even before, because some countries were way above these limits, but it's very likely that these rules will be overwritten after 2023 as well, because we are in the situation where there is the biggest budget of the EU in terms of recovery and resilience, the big package, but at some point also we will face the consequences, whether it's because of the increase of public debt or the impacts of printing money and making this way the funds available. Also, we have to look at from a very broader perspective. So the whole point of Digiser was also to see not the issue through the digital and technology lens, but also to focus and put it into the wider context. So not to get bogged down by digital, but also to see, what is the purpose. In the end, it's very simple to improve the quality of life and to all citizens in Europe. And the costs for public sector are not only linked to the increasing service costs, but we also have to factor in the increased costs related to climate change, how to address that, and also the different costs that we have to bear due to the pandemic and due to deglobalization, due to conflicts, and so forth. The local context matters very much, but also the local level has to be put into the wider context of the EU. How does digital come in? So it's not about just digitizing existing analog processes, but it's also rethinking the entire way of delivering governance and public services, not only focusing on individual municipalities, but also bringing in the added value of working together at the EU level. So meaning that scaling becomes increasingly important. When we talk about digital revolution, it's all about efficiency. So meaning that we all should adapt. If you make linkages to the previous technological revolution, steam engine, conveyor belt, it means that everybody can benefit from an innovation and make processes more efficient and see immense productivity gains, which we are currently not seeing because of the isolated manner that the different 95,000 municipalities are doing in their way they go about their digital journey. Talking about the grand challenges, we identified 4 broad challenges in our project. First one is the scaling. Exactly the fact that I was just talking about, that there are over 90,000 municipalities in Europe, and a lot of them surrounded by the same administrative, health, transport, and other relevant sectors, and all they are delivering basically quite similar services, of course with different nature and different place-based context, but in many ways their operational model is quite similar, or at least the end goal is quite similar. The second challenge is the government structure. You also heard Professor Matsukato talking about this in the morning, that we operate in silos, also in public sector, meaning that the different service areas oftentimes don't meet one another. And technology here also is replicated, or technology silos are replicating these existing service silos oftentimes, and oftentimes are then exacerbating some problems, meaning that there is little emphasis on creating really, if you want to change government, you need to make sure that certain bits of the government are horizontal so that the information can flow from one department to another, or at least they can also share some common resources. Because, as I mentioned earlier, digitalization oftentimes complicates things as well. And this we can see also in terms of what different types of skills and profiles are needed to upkeep especially digital infrastructure that is badly designed, so meaning that it's also locked in silos, so you need increasingly duplicating roles in terms of management, administration, tech support, and so forth, which, of course, with limited budget comes oftentimes from the budget that you would normally put towards the frontline service providers, the teachers, the bus drivers, the doctors. So ideally, a government should have certain bits horizontal, but not only in terms of looking at individual governments, but increasingly more to also look at it from the multi-level governance perspective, but also from the network of different governments, because it makes more and more sense to have certain centralized units that share the capacity to provide these platforms, to maintain registries, so that not all the municipalities have to do the same thing, upkeep the same systems, like similarly functioning systems, not the same systems. The third challenge are the processes. So far too much effort is being focused on how technology can optimize existing processes rather than to rethink how to achieve better outcomes. So the current service delivery is very linear, and usually it also we can see that it happens, or it creates silos within silos. So you have the policy class, you have the people, the experts that need to somehow guess the requirements, how to meet these, how technology can meet these policy requirements. And guessing, I'm saying, because there's often no process to really test the assumptions behind these policy requirements, which in ideal situation would require talking to the end users, talking to the frontline service providers, trying to figure out what is the best and optimal way to deliver these services. And then these people are chucking it over to the next group of people that need to put it into the terms of references, and then you try to contract a service provider that can have a different understanding of how this services can be structured, and oftentimes then is being developed in isolation from the other infrastructures that the municipality may already have in place. And then, of course, it's inflicted to the end user. I was recently visiting a city close by, and me among other tourists, it was funny to observe. There was a group of people that tried to buy a metro ticket, but not just single ticket, but a day ticket. And it was impossible to figure out within 20 minutes. Eventually, it resorted to going to the cashier and buying it that way. So oftentimes you see that these interfaces that we are forced upon have been developed with the end user completely out of the picture. When it comes to the processes as well and change of processes, I come from Estonia, so it's often hailed as a front runner in terms of digitalization, especially at the central government level. And the Estonians have always been telling that the success behind their transformation, because they quite radically transformed how the government operates, was behind two factors. One was that there was no legacy because the Soviet system didn't work anymore, so you needed to reinvent. And there was lack of funds, so meaning that you couldn't build a very big public sector. Unfortunately, a lot of the other municipalities face only the one problem that is linked to the budget, but the legacy is still there, and the legacy is extremely difficult to just get rid of from one day to the next one. The final challenge that we dealt with was linked to the capacity. It links to the skills. It links to the infrastructure. It links also to processes, process management, because part of this, the challenge of the previous slide was also that if you don't, I mean, you run a process that takes a couple of years from end to end, and you never test it, you never test it with the end users, you never monitor how this service is being used, what the users are thinking about it after you run it a few months, a year or so. How can you ever succeed to deliver something that is being well received and also meets the increased expectations of the public? And it's often the problem of the small municipalities, because the big ones, they benefit from also the influx of tax base. They have the money, they have the means, and they also can make mistakes. They can develop systems, scrap them, build new ones, whereas the small ones are kind of in a locked-in situation where they don't have the flexibility to fail. But there is some initiatives that are supporting to overcome these challenges. And I'm also personally involved quite intensively in one of them, and that was also partly how Digiser project came about. This is the livingin.eu movement. And here we see cities voluntarily committing themselves to work on a set of successful pilots to scale them up, to work on a large-scale adaptation of standards, for example, that help them to better structure their data, to make sure that this data can be exchangeable, so interoperable systems. And there are a list of key let's say, successful adaptations that these cities are working on, and among them multiple other things. One of the activities is linked to the monitoring of digital transformation, and there we provided also assistance through the DigiSer to understand what is happening at local level in the public sector. Also, presidencies have been quite active in that front. The French are currently carrying some flags that Slovenians started. Slovenians were working on 3 different legislative proposals: the Data Governance Act, the Digital Market Act, and Digital Services Act. And it's very likely that the Data Governance Act will be voted into legislation in the parliament very soon. The French are also working very intensively on the twin transition of digital and green. So I hope to also learn more about the work that they have carried out in that front in the last 6 months. I will end here, and I will give the floor now to our first speaker, Grazia. Grazia, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Martin. Good afternoon, everybody. Martin was very good to challenge us with the grand challenges that he just presented. And the idea was to understand to what extent cities, so the local level of government in Europe, is dealing with digital innovation in the provision of public services, which was quite a challenge, also considering the incredible lack of data there, because the most of it is available more at a country level. We know a bit more than what we know from cities. We have some information about cities, but few of them, while they wanted a clear understanding, a clear picture, a snapshot of Europe as a whole. So this was the challenge. The challenge was to create an index, an indicator, giving us more or less how cities are dealing with this challenge along the challenges that he just quoted. So our task was to develop this digital public service value index. And you see on the right side of the picture there the complexity of the schema we achieved to develop to get this task to be accomplished without losing the clear perspective on the challenges that Martin just gave you. So you see on the top of this 3 schema, this is a very simplified schema of the previous one. We conceived, we tried to put together both, let's say, the digital dimension as per the infrastructuring. So how much they have gained as per the digital infrastructure in the delivery of public services. Not only the left side of the picture does not only take into account the infrastructuring of the services that we wanted to explore, but also to what extent they have been able to penetrate the use of the services, the adoption of the services. So how much the services in the digital mode, they are really being used by citizens or are going to change somehow citizens' life. So that's the left side of this picture. On the right side, we tried to go through the challenges that Martin presented you as per the process term or the structure, organization. So we tried to understand to what extent cities are not only changing their ways to provide services through adopting the available digital solutions or innovation, but also to what extent they are somehow really transforming the way they are organized, the manner in which they do design services, and within, coherently with this, you can imagine the challenge is big. Coherently with this, we tried also to understand to what extent they were sort of prone to feel challenged by those simple rules like not being silos, the structure, cooperating, sharing solution, which is quite a huge challenge, is not enough, war, I would say, because we really witness in public sector somehow competition among sector, which is even taking place on the side of the adoption of solution. I have the best one, I have it differently from yours, and things like this. And I do not share my data with you. So we were starting this adventure by creating a sort of, ideal conceptual reference for us, a structure concept for us. And in the end, we came up with a structure which was much more complex than these two sides of the tree that I just presented you. This is the final tree that was giving us and will give you the picture of this aggregated index. So we did it. Is telling us a bit, not everything. So we really also gave relevance to the sub-indicators in this schema. And so you see, for example, just to tell you, the proneness to let me check. Okay, this is the one that was on the right side of the picture before. Proneness to change, we explored it through change management. So how you are, driving somehow the change, the transformation, but also what do you do in order to make it innovative? So not just transforming it, but making it so. And you see that there are other sub-indicators. I will not go through all of them because it would be crazy, but you will read about it in the reports. And the one on the bottom that you see there, so the digital innovation, the digital service innovation maturity, which we interpreted as per the, I can't see that, digital innovation, I guess, I don't remember the term, and the level of service embedment, so the level of penetration of this digital transformation, and some other sub-indicators. So within this complex, we achieved to have such a complex concept, not only because the challenge that Martin gave us was high, but also because we understood that working with secondary data, so producing secondary data from available ones, was quite distortive somehow of the intent of our research due to the lack of such a penetration of data sources. So for many cities, for maybe somehow to 20 cities all over Europe, we could manage to have good data. Good, not in the sense that data are not good, but good in the direction of our analysis goal. So we have tortured the cities in Europe with a very long survey. I have to say that after, at the end of the data collection phase, we are proud to say that we were able to collect more or less 250 feedbacks from cities. So it's quite a number, quite an achievement, but it was quite a challenge to get this amount of responses. And the only once we could really be sure that data enough were there, we were able to close the concept of the data analytics that I just presented you. So we went through an important data collection. As you can see there, we collected more or less more than 2,256 responses, which is almost nothing with respect to what Martin just said is the number of cities in Europe, but quite a result from the relevance of the findings that we get. The survey was quite long. So you can see there were more or less 74 mandatory questions, and they were opening, eventually, some of them, towards 54 additional questions. Cities behaved very well, I have to say. They did it. So we have quite a relevant database now. Now, what we did there is, through the analysis of the data, we have developed reports, question by questions. Some of them are relevant to be considered as proxy of small, I would say, micro phenomena. So they are interesting for each of them, but also considering the schema that I just showed you, we have developed 33 indicators, which are those that I have showed you in the three framework, which are there available to tell us about the behaviors that cities are adopting in this challenge, which is related to the digital transformation and digital innovation of the public sector. Data are already available. We have completed the transfer of all the data to the platform, ESPON platform. This was quite a big challenge because we had to transfer not the raw data, but also all the data coming from the indicators, which is what we did already. So they are available there. For any curiosity, you will find in the report some maps, very relevant, and this will be said by the speaker that will follow me, are related to the dimension of the city. So they sum up how cities behave considering their dimension divided obviously by some slots, some threshold of the weight of the population. But also we have developed, and you will see this later on, a sort of a mapping on, you can see here, on a semiotic map plan, which was relevant to us to understand the trend of this transformation. This is, it was quite a challenge even to find the labeling of this, semantic categorization, but it was quite interesting, and it's quite interesting to understand, to see that the manner in which they behave is following a trend, a clear trend, and we will keep more or less, let's say, not so clearly disclosed what are the best cities in quadrants number 1, but you can see that the trend is clear. So in the right direction is there for cities in Europe. Some are a bit slower, but they have to learn, and we are obviously Isaac, who will follow Michelangelo later on, will tell you some of those things that we think are relevant lessons learned from this analysis and useful guidelines for the cities. You will obviously for each indicator and indicator made by indicator, we will propose different interpretation of the sub-indicator which are providing us the different dimensions that we want to explore with different visualizations, but you are much more expert than me on these things. What is interesting that we think will be very useful is that we have created also a report, a textual report for each city. So for each city we have prepared, considering the different value that they perform, question by question, indicator by indicator, we have standardized the creation of a text which is explaining the cities what, let's say, what do we mean by certain expression, how do they behave, and that's the yellow part, with respect to that specific issue, and also what could be done from their side, that's the blue part, of each text that we have developed. The report is quite long. We are now making some tests to understand whether this is useful for cities, the manner in which we develop it, but this is the kind of text that after the correlation with the data of each single city comes out available for them. So what we did by developing the entire analysis, so from the survey development up to the reporting way, is trying also to push cities to have a reflection on what we are reporting, not obviously as a judgment, rather as a guideline for a way to improve their performances and the effectiveness of their transformation. So with this, I leave the floor to Michelangelo Secchi.
Thank you, Grazia, everyone. So, as you can easily infer from this presentation, so the kind of work that we have been doing in Digiser nowadays offer us the possibility to explore different dimensions of the digital transformation of cities in Europe. In this presentation, I will present some insights that I think are the most, let's say, the one positioned at the higher level of our, let's say, framework of analysis, and maybe some of these insights could not look like so much new, so much disruptive, but still the important thing to remember is that they are based on data evidence. So this is important. So just a brief overview of the participant cities. As Grazia was saying, we had almost 250 cities that participated to the questionnaire that fed the composite indexes. It's important to understand that we tried during the data collection to ensure the existence of a minimum representativity of the sample of city that we were intercepting. At least in the beginning, we used as a criteria a minimum distribution of city between European countries, between different European countries, and try to apply other criteria like having a good distribution of cities in terms of size, in terms of average GDP per capita, and these were the main criteria that we used. Let's say that we were capable to respect the first one really well, quite well the second, and then it was not so easy to recreate a perfect sample representative of the situation of European cities. But it's important to clarify that when we try to generalize and use data referred to the state of the art of European cities, we use these reference samples. So we do not use all the cities that participated, but use the value generated by this sample, which somehow takes into account of the huge diversity of European cities in terms of competencies, power, extension, etc. So let's have a look at the main insight that we found. This is a chart that has been already shown a few minutes before by Grazia. As a matter of fact, I added also the list of the first 20 cities performing, the one that are in the top right corner, the corner number 1. And this chart is a Cartesian chart that on one axis try to read and to understand what is the performance of city in terms of, let's say, digital maturity. So to what extent, to make it simple, the digitalization process has been, let's say, advanced. And on the other hand, what is the degree of organizational transformation that is occurring in these kind of cities. So these are the two main pillars of the three that was shown before, and I think it's something that was expected, was one of our hypotheses, but now it's also visible in data. You can clearly see a linear correlation between these two phenomena. So we can generalize this finding by saying that there's no possibility to push the digital transformation to a higher extent if it doesn't come together with a serious rethinking of the processes, the procedure, and the governance, and overall, let's say, the innovation of the organizational processes. And the shape of the cloud of cities that you see in the Cartesian chart shows you clearly this trend, which is getting close to what is a linear correlation. Only a limited number of cities have counterdeductive performance in this sense, so they are really good in digital transformation and they didn't change too much the organization, or vice versa, while most of the cities are positioned along this line. The other thing that we should say that if one is the score, the ideal score in which say the top performance in both direction, well, you can clearly see that the majority of the cities that we have been surveying are positioned in the bottom left quadrant, which still is in the linear correlation, but at a lower intensity of performance. The following slide try to show you also some spatial trends. So the chart, the map that you see is a map in which we organized by quartiles the cities as quartiles of the, say, the main indicator, digital public service value index, and these allow us to identify certain main spatial trends that it's important to understand cannot be generalized as country trends, because in some country we only had a limited number of cities, 2, 3, 4 cities that do not allow to generalize the performance of the city to the performance of all the cities of that country. So let's take it like, let's say, a direction that tells us something that should then be verified at a higher level of detail in each country. But what is evident is that well, of course, the big cities, and I will come back on it, tend to perform better. So there is for sure a scaling related issue. So as much as the city is large in terms of population, and it tends to be more advanced both from a digital transformation perspective than if we look at the innovation of organizational processes. The second thing that we can observe on this map is the fact that there is a group of leading cities that were also in the list that I showed in the previous slide, concentrated in the Netherlands, in Baltic countries and Scandinavia. We have a group of follower cities that are mainly located in the Mediterranean area and Eastern Europe. We have an area in which, let's say, there is balanced, let's say, toward the higher part of the scale of the let's say the ranking in the Iberian Peninsula, both in Spain and Portugal. The cities that have participated in our research have been, let's say, achieving significantly good results, as it's visible. And finally, the other pattern that is difficult to interpret is the lack. The other area that is difficult to interpret is the Central Europe area, where there are unclear patterns and a huge variety of performance in the cities that we have been detecting. This is also due to the, let's say, also the difference of institutional framework in that area. And that is another finding, which is also in this case confirming some of our hypotheses, but in this case is also, let's say, supported by data evidence, is that we ran several correlation with statistic data coming from Eurostat, from let's say statistic data set that, as you know, for city provide just a minimum number of data usable, but using this data, making them react with the primary data that we collect, was a way also to find possible correlation, possible explanatory driver. And one thing that is quite evident, we used both, let's say, we try to correlate the performance of city with the population of the city and with the wealth intended as the GDP per capita, the average GDP per capita. That was a data that we were able to achieve, to reconstruct at NUTS 3 level, so close to the dimension that we were exploring. And what we could observe is that for sure, let's say, the main variable, the variable that more correlate to the performance of city is the first one, is related to the population, while the wealth and availability of resources locally, let's say, is not per se a variable so much capable to explain the phenomena that we observed. And then, up to now, I've been looking at the top level of the tree. So let me see if I can find this. We have been just looking more or less this part of the tree, but as Grazia was showing, there are several indicators, and some of them are quite detailed and can be used to analyze specific subphenomena that per se have already a lot of complexity and can be explored in multifaceted disciplinary perspectives. And in this case, I took one as an example, which is the indicator on co-creation, which is by the way, one relevant, let's say, kind of practice, so the practice of involving citizens and user of services in the design and the provision of feedback of public services, that in our, let's say, framework is one of the component of the societal engagement, together with other sub-indicators that are more, let's say, oriented to the democratic engagement of citizens in local public policy making. In this case, we focus more on the co-creation intended as the way in which public authorities involve citizens at a higher degree of intensity and directly using, for example, digital means of engagement like those data-based, as you will see in a while, because, well, in this slide I just show you what are the questions that feed this indicator, and here you can read more or less what were the questions in their integral version. And well, this is, for example, the kind of data that we can observe. In this case, you can see more confirmed also at this level, even if the correlation is less evident than in other indicators. But the fact that I mean, also in this case, there is a correlation between the size of the cities. These are cluster of cities by size, and the performance in this indicator. Usually, in our report, you will find this kind of chart repeated for all the sub-indicators that compose the DPSVI, and that's also interesting. So I think this, let's say, this kind of analysis is interesting if we look at large cluster, but it's more meaningful probably when we look at specific cities. So somehow the clusters are useful because they can be used for comparative, as a comparative term to understand and to interpret the performance of single cities. In particular, during our studies, we identified the 10 cities that have been analyzed by more in detail, also with additional extra qualitative interviews that have been carried out by one of our partners. And these are, for example, the data related to co-creation in this group of cities. It's important to understand in this example that we have been talking about the composite index, but the research make available also the data coming from the specific question. And in some cases, if we want to go to scratch more in detail what is exactly the point with regard to specific question, well, we can also resort to this kind of data. And this is a question that is quite interesting. It's a question that asks how the public authority use service-related data to improve the offer of digital service and distinguish between, let's say, a light way to use. So it's the use of data regarding the use of service as a way to assess and to, let's say, decide to in what manner eventually change and transform the delivery of certain service. It's represented by the orange column, while the blue column shows what is the actual engagement intended as proactive engagement in providing feedback with respect to the service experienced by the user. And in this case, it's obviously more intense and more also, let's say, complex way to collect and reuse this kind of data. It's interesting also because for, if I'm not wrong, 16 questions out of the almost 90 that we had in our questionnaire, they asked cities to answer per service area. And as you can see, this allows us to break down the answer by service area. We also have some composite index that are organized by service area. And it's important also to have this vision because help us to understand what are the service area more lagging behind. With this respect, I think that the data that you see in this chart are confirmed in several cases, with the general service and the administration service that have been achieving Europe-wide in several cities a good degree, let's say, of digital transformation, also because in several countries, in several contexts, there are standard, both in terms of standard of application, standard of formats that have been implemented and diffused that probably fostered this process. Usually the sector of transport and mobility, which is a sector with a high intensity of exchange with user, is a sector in which there is a lot of experimentation of data reuse, engagement of user, collection of feedback, etc. And it's interesting to see that also in the planning, the spatial planning, also because, I mean, we are in a spatial observatory, so it makes sense to observe that also in that case there are in general, it's a sector quite active, while other have less good performance. Again, the utility sector, let's say, is a sector in which probably there was it was not so easy to understand exactly to what extent this kind of activity is entrusted to the utility company or is referred in the answer to the sector in which the utility operates, and that probably misled some of the answer of our cities. So with this, I conclude this part of the presentation. I mean, we can come back on the data if you have any question, and of course, we hope, let's say, that I understand that in part some of these data are not completely astonishing the public. Many of the researcher and policymakers that deal with this kind of topics are aware about this, but in this case, I think we have a good territorial evidence to inspire policy making, and it's a joke with the ESPON slogan, and so I pass to the policy making colleague the state. Thank you very much.
Probably, yeah. I don't know if it will it fit. Oh, I should get to. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Isaac. I am I'm an economist, and I am coming from the Connected Places Catapult in the UK. First, I want to thank my colleagues and Martin for the presentations today. Deloitte's not here, but I also thank them for the work they've done towards this. So I have the pleasure of, if you like, summarizing the policy recommendations from this research. And while I was listening to all the presentations in the morning and also from my colleagues, it occurred to me that much of what I'm going to say has been mentioned in one form or another, either by my colleagues here on this project, which is not surprising since it's the same project, but also by other research that's been presented today. In particular, in the morning, I think it was Professor Matsukato, she mentioned three things that caught my eye or my ear, which is this idea of mission orientation when she was talking about the Apollo program. She also talked about desiloing or getting rid of silos in how during this project or during the Apollo program. The third point that she mentioned was working across regions or jurisdictions within government. And here I think she was talking more about Europe. And in a way, these are 3 points that are still, that have come out from among the policy recommendations that have been generated by this project. So here goes. When I was, when we were coming up with the policy recommendations for this presentation, there were two options: either to come up with a very long list of recommendations, most of which would be forgotten, or to summarize, to come up with something shorter, but still captures the essence of the policy recommendations from the project. So, Martin has mentioned part of the rationale for this, or part of the rationale for why government in general and local government in particular needs to address the digitalization. One of which I think was about the challenge of aging. So clearly, there is an opportunity for why government has an incentive to address this issue. The second point he mentioned was I think it was about the economy. So these are two powerful incentives for why digitalization, while it may be challenging, but it still offers great opportunities for how society can deal with some of the challenges and benefit from the opportunities. Now, I need to... Right. So, the first policy recommendation is around strategy. So, digitalization can be overwhelming, but like in all major programs, once you have the mission in place, it is instructive to have a strategy in place that is consistent with the long-term objectives of the organization, or in this case, the local government. So the policy has to be aligned with the long-term objectives of the government. And this, in a way, comes from the idea that we often have, or at least within democracies, we have election or electoral calendars which can affect much of the policy that goes on within governments. Much of the policy generating framework within governments. So it's important that the policy around digitalization, which provides, if you like, the guiding framework, that those policies need to be consistent with the long-term objectives. The second policy recommendation looks at the use of evidence in implementing policies on digitalization. So by evidence, we mean that rather than taking the latest technology and just applying it because it's the latest technology, for example, the local authority needs to take an evidence-based approach, collect feedback where possible, run small-scale tester programs, and then develop a mechanism that allows for emerging solutions to be adopted into the digitalization policy structure. Thirdly, the policy implementation mechanism or process ought to be agile. By agile, we mean that as you're implementing policies, new innovations come onto the market. You may have, let's say, a long 5-year or 10-year plan or program on how to digitalize services. Of course, we know that technology is dynamic, right? It's always changing. Innovations are always coming up. So there should be a mechanism that incorporates new innovations to allow for incremental improvements. Fourthly, and the fourth point, in a way, touches on the coordination between government jurisdictions, where it's useful that, especially at the very local level, where you have the much smaller local governments, that there is some level of coordination between across, rather horizontally and vertically across jurisdictions. For example, regions or bigger cities and the national level policies need to be consistent with what's at the local level. Obviously, in most cases, it's the local authorities that are going to have to align their policy approach or implementation approach and policy goals with the bigger jurisdictions, such as regions and the national level. And of course, this type of alignment opens up opportunities where some of the smaller local authorities or local governments that tend to be strapped for funding. They can access funding from other organizations or other governments at the regional level, the national level, and even at the European level. Another recommendation area is about participating in networks. In a lot of the interactions we've had with the cities through the survey and also the deep dive interactions when writing the case studies, it's clear that some of the best performing cities when it comes to digitalization are active in networks. And these may be networks with other cities at the same level or at the same jurisdictional level, but also networks with specialist organizations, let's say such as OWASC, networks of EU programs. And these are very good networks through which knowledge on digitalization diffuses to some of these cities. So participation in stakeholder networks, EU programs are also a good source of funds and know-how on digitalization. Now, one area that's within the remit of this project was to look at citizen engagement. And this sixth policy recommendation is about when developing digitalization services or digital services, this is an area where many of the citizens may not have the capacity or the skills to access these services. So this recommendation is about encouraging the designers, the cities, to work in collaboration with citizens and other users of their services to design services that cater to the different abilities of the users. So in a way, the digitalization process should be citizen-centric. Otherwise, you end up leaving a lot of the citizens behind, and they don't use the services, and therefore the services don't serve the purpose for which they're designed to do. Still okay with time?
Yeah, but maybe you give a more concise ending to the. It's very good, but yeah. 5 more minutes maybe then.
Okay, cool. In the interest of time, yeah, I'll just be a bit more brief. So, so this recommendation touches on the silo point. Digitalization is about using systems and taking advantage of the of technology. And I won't labor this point on silo, but really, cities ought to look for opportunities to limit the silo mentality, and where possible to get rid of it. Another point is on adopting common standards. Obviously, interoperable systems and having common standards offer a great opportunity to run joint projects and joint procurement, and digitalization of services is one area that can take advantage of this. Now, institutional capacity was one of the two most important reasons given as to why cities fail to digitalize, the other one being funding. Now, institutional capacity really is about having the staff, the ICT teams to operationalize the digitalization process. So that's one area that also needs to improve. And it was hinted at earlier, proneness to change, put differently, this is really engendering a culture of experimenting with technology as one of the areas that also could benefit the digitalization process. Right. So 5 points, policy recommendations around proactively engaging citizens to be co-creators of digital solutions, having, rather prioritizing systemically important interventions. And here we can talk about 5G because of their power to have a multiplicative impact on the process. And then digitalization enhancing principles should be part of the long-term strategy. Say the once-only principle, use of open data and open software, cross-platforms, having these systems, these practices embedded within the digitalization implementation process can only serve the objective. And we've talked about societal engagement. That's critical because citizens need to give feedback for the services to be of value to them. Lastly, we've also developed a policy handbook providing more detail on how these can be, these policy recommendations can be implemented. I think I'll stop there and then I'll invite Martin Gauk to take over. Thank you.
Thank you very much to all the speakers. Yes, please, let's give a round of applause. I think to kind of wrap it up, it's a very nice segue that you made in the end, Isaac, with the presentations in the morning. However, I think having a mission orientation around this, a goal that is, let's say, a more dream-like, like going to the moon, rather than a very somewhat boring one of changing public sector. Maybe all of you can comment a little bit how to instigate this change that often is kind of stuck in also how public policy is being made, and sometimes status quo is a more convenient, comfortable way to go. And just very quick remarks, maybe if you have some flash thoughts. If you don't, then pass the microphone on. And then I would like to give the floor to you. I don't see any Slido questions, but if you have in the audience, you can already raise your hand and we can pass the microphone to you.
So, yeah, that's a tall order. To, in a way, mention digitalization in local government within the same sentence as going to the moon. But at the end of the day, when I think about this topic, I see a lot of similarities. And within the decision makers running public service, I think if their mission is really to improve the standard of living of their citizens, I don't see any contradiction as to why they wouldn't be able to borrow some of the best approaches from the more grand objectives, such as going to the moon, and apply these methods and techniques, or customize them to their objectives at the local level. I don't know if I've gone too far from the question, but perhaps Martin or Grazia can do a better job.
I have just a small comment, because that was a reflection we did in the beginning when we decided to use the literature from Mazzucato on mission-oriented innovation. So maybe one of the reflections that we did is that probably one of the mistakes that we do is to conceive the digitalization per se as a mission. So the point is, what mission could be achieved through the digitalization? And that is something that probably could be more engaging, even though I mean, if we break it down at the local level, the mission can be really different, but they can use similar patterns and similar methods to be achieved. And I think that maybe one lesson that we can learn is to avoid to objectify the concept of digital transformation per se as a final goal. And that is probably one of the findings, well, more at theoretical level coming out from our research. I don't know.
I fully agree with that point, because I mean, we can see also this happening in many governments that are quite mature in their digital transformation process, where they don't have necessarily a specific strategy for digital transformation, but it's rather providing equal opportunities, working on sustainability, quality of life, and so forth. And then they embed these processes. So, for example, while Finland a few years back had a digital strategy for health sector, now it's just health strategy. Any questions from the audience? Any remarks? I don't see any, but just maybe then to give the opportunity to make any final remarks from the panelists. I will start. I think changing the government is a more daunting challenge than going to the moon, but I think there is hope, as I think I also tried to present in my opening, that just continuing this way will not be sustainable for a long period. So there is a demand or need to change, and it has to happen somehow. So I'll leave it at that, and I'll pass to the panelists. If you have anything linked to the subject, or even going further to conclude with, please go ahead. Otherwise, you can pass on the microphone.
I would like to tell you something. Okay, among the many findings, we didn't give you this today, but it's there. One of the surprising correlation is related to the networking, is somehow related to what Isaac was saying. So network with cities, this was one of the suggestions that we provided. The important correlation is there, saying us that cities who do exchange experiences in networks, you know, by collaborating, they do perform better. That's incredible, even independently from the dimension. So I have to be honest, I thought always that, you know, these networks of city, they are there to do something, while this was quite relevant to us as a finding, not necessarily because, okay, it's a good data that we can share with you, but because I think that one of the relevance of the relevant things that we are observing is not only that we need a mission there to put there, but is that when this mission is shared, the proneness to learn is bigger. And this is something that, in my view, should, and is clear there. And is clear there from the results, for some of the reasons they do think, when you will have the chance going through the interviews that we have performed with 10 cities out of the 250, this is something there. So the cities are slowly getting there that they cannot do everything alone. Sharing knowledge, sharing experiences, sharing experiments, sharing learnings is something relevant. And if they do this in this very competing cities, you know, match that they are playing every day, I think they will also achieve very boring, but it's not very boring, because this is a big challenge we have in front of us, that the change of a public sector is, in my view, given the urgency of some challenges, a bit closer. That's I think what also comes out a bit from the data that we collected, and the digital is there to give us support.
Just maybe to add to what just Gracia told, indeed, but there is also this pitfall that the cities that are prone to networking, they tend to be the same ones. So that was also what Thomas Woben was talking about this morning. And also I think there needs to be funding allocated and resources allocating to enable this type of networking. One of the success stories coming from Finland is the 6-city strategy, where essentially 6 biggest cities in Finland developed a plan and a strategy to work together on different matters, including also digital. But it required also quite a lot of funding to make sure that these representatives of these cities could meet regularly and could work together and could also allocate time aside from other activities that are on their desks, because it's always additional work, and if it's not somehow put into the program and also means allocated, it doesn't work so well.
John, there are questions?
Hello. Wojciech Pomianowski, Polish Institute of Geography, Academy of Sciences. I don't see a lot of critical thought in your work. I don't know the exact content, but judging from what you are saying here, you are quite enthusiastic about digital transformation in cities, right? Did you try to identify some negative aspects of digital transformation? I mean, in commercial world, transferring into digital domain often is connected with just cutting costs and transferring the burden into customers, and in this case it would be citizens. Did you notice this kind of behavior of this kind of transformation too?
One evidence that may be an answer, a partial answer to your question, is coming from a set of answers that we did, a set of questions that we did not comment with you because it was, as you can understand, a bit larger, and is coming from the COVID, let's say, activated digitalization. So there was a set of 10, 12 questions there out of this, or maybe less, I don't remember. So what is evident there is that obviously there was an important push towards digitalization, thanks due to the COVID emergency. But this did not cut the relation with the users. So it simply tried to reduce let's say those to reduce to the digital, so to the remote, let's say, interaction, those services which are considered basic, like booking, like registering, or for example the adoption of the digital identity, so the existence of some data which you do not need to share, you know, every time, or the one only principle. So the importance that the survey gave to the role of the users, to their feedbacks, to the amount of different, to the manner in which the services are being developed, considered the different capabilities, the different, interaction abilities of the different users, I think is taking under control the risk that we are so much enthusiastic. The data that you have seen do not report very happy situations. So also what we tried to understand is to what extent the public authorities are sort of, you know, prone to be only followers of the digital market, to understand to what extent they do make decisions independently of what is the offer. Okay, obviously, the data there are not very enthusiastic. No, I think that at least from what, not in the sense of what we lose by digitizing. Obviously, we were trying to understand to what extent this is a good result, but the analysis was taking into account some relevant risk and biases which are there usually. So in the big picture, we don't have a clear answer saying in the direction of your question, but some of the questions that we posed shows that this is true only partially, because by default, the accessibility of services is improved.
Just a small comment to complement what Grazia was saying is that, more diplomatic, my comment is that to properly answer your question, there is an intrinsic limitation in our research, that our research picture the situation now. This kind of question require to observe the change in time. So probably to have a better understanding of to what extent digital transformation affect some of these phenomena that we have been observing, it would be useful to, let's say, check what is the state of the art in a couple of years, or to have a series of data that somehow can provide more relevance to this kind of insight. Nonetheless, I confirm what Grazia is saying. Is not the conclusion is not 100%, let's say, techno-enthusiast, techno-solutionist, let me say. So there are many parts of the research that shows that introducing a technological innovation digital innovation per se, if you are not capable to actually innovate, let's say, the underlying structure, underlying processes, does not lead to improvement of the quality of the public sector, public service delivery. So.
Maybe to add also, I mean, we try to investigate also how marginalized communities are incorporated into service design. And of course, cities tend to say that it's going good, or at least they are making an effort. Whereas actually, if you want to really know about this subject matter, you need to go to these marginalized communities and ask them about that issue, which is quite an endeavor to do, and would require either a more case study approach or let's say much bigger budget and much bigger project. But I think we did try to, at least in the conceptual and in the challenges part, to address these negative externalities and challenges that go about with transformation. One of them I talked quite extensively about was that when especially done in silos and done in these small municipalities, do duplication, you will increase a lot of positions that are linked to managing these complex systems, to administer, which takes away resources from the frontline service provision, which is the one that matters for the consumer. If you go to the hospital and you don't get treatment for 6 months, or you have to wait for a specialist for that long, I mean, if you knew that the reason behind that is, I mean, there are several reasons, but much of the money goes into managing, even in one country, different patient registries, for example. And that could be better used to support the training of doctors and nurses and to pay them better wages to attract more employees in that sector. So it requires also a different way of thinking and understanding what's behind how the pie is cooked. Also, I think one very important matter when we talk about scaling governments, meaning adopting the same standards, working with the same principles, how we handle data, and because these are the fundamental points, the platforms, the data, and then the individual services, if you base them on those elements, it's quite cheap and easy to do, and you can get rid of them, make new ones with relative little cost, also in terms of maintenance. But if you adopt these standards, it means also that, for example, if you are a public authority in Poland that wants to procure a specific digital service, and the Polish company is able to provide them that service, it would be also good for that Polish company, the SME, to sell this same solution to cities in Spain, for example. But if there are no common standards, it's not easy to do. And if there is no common market, also the SMEs to invest in trying to be competitive in that market is limited. And then you have the situation where public money is being spent on goes to Microsoft, goes to bigger companies that tell them the standards for them and provide them a solution for them, and the SME market is kind of robbed in that sense. So public sector has a very important role there also to support the business side of it. I mean, digital single market is about that. I mean, we talk about the monetary market more and we understand how that works, but the digital market is very interesting and very relevant topic also when we talk about the challenges and the kind of negative things with what coincides with cities and countries doing it in isolation and in silos and so forth. Any more questions? We are running out of time already, so if there is any quick reflections, we can take one more question and then we need to wrap up. I guess everybody is more in favor for coffee, so thank you very much to all the speakers again, and I ask one more round of applause to our good speakers, and also would like to thank all of you for being here, and let's go and enjoy the coffee break.